So welcome back to the second session of the day and fifth session of the conference. And the theme of this session is reimagining the design of collectives. Strong women collectives are a key enabler to women's economic empowerment. The DAY NRLM has extensively promoted women's collectives, self-help groups and federated institutions, built financial, human and social capital and impacted gender equality, poverty eradication and inclusive growth. Over time, women's economic collectives such as producer organizations were promoted to mobilize women members around a common economic activity. In some states, social groups were formed to address specific issues related to gender equality or as a platform for social action. The time is apt to look at the future of women's platforms, SHGs and their federations and producer collectives, particularly from the perspective of Ministry of Rural Development as a promoter of these institutions. So to deliberate on this very important theme, we have a very diverse panel comprising of experts from civil society organizations, grassroots organizations, government organizations, and academia. Let me welcome our very esteemed panel for this session. First of all, I would like to invite on stage moderator, Mr. Anjani Kumar Singh, Senior Program Officer, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause, please. And our panelists are Mr. Shaji KV, Chairperson, National Bank for Agriculture and Rural Development, NABARD. Mr. C.S. Reddy, Founder and Chief Executive Officer, Andhra Pradesh Mahila Abhivruddhi Society. Ms. Reema Nanavati, Director, Self-Employed Women's Association, SEVA. Professor M.S. Sriram, Chairperson, Center for Public Policy, IIM Bangalore. Bengaluru, I'm sorry. IIM Bangalore. Mr. John Schrijver, Project Manager, Rabobank from Netherlands. So over to you, Mr. Anjani Kumar Singh. IIM Bangalore and Bengaluru.
Thank you. And thank you for coming to the room, immediately after the tea break. All well in time. We have to reimagine, collectives. India has been a very fertile place when it comes to the collectives. Starting from, the Kishan Club or water user associations, self-help groups, farmer producers company, cooperatives. There's so many, collectives which exist in India and in such a large number. I don't think, there is any place on the globe where so many collectives in different form which exist and not only exist, but also have a connect with the larger mainstream organizations. As you heard yesterday, in the NRLM presentation, SHG dealing with the with the commercial banks, private sector banks, and all. So, in the beginning, let me invite Madam Sarda Muralidharan, CJ Officer of Indian Administrative Service of Kerala cadre, having more than 30 years of experience in the government, and she is a authority when it comes to local governance, rural development, women's economic empowerment, and all. And currently she holds as a position of the Additional Chief Secretary, Local Self-Government Department of Kerala. Madam, may I invite you to come to the stage and share your initial thoughts and reflections.
Said by Mr. Vijayanand earlier in the day. It helps to be reflective. So what was the purpose for organizing women together, bringing them together as self-help groups? It could be that we wanted to bring money into the hands of women. It could be that we wanted them to come together and improve their agency. Agency is a very loaded word in what it means as far as concerned. But if I were to say that what is really the purpose of collectivizing poor women, I would not start with financial inclusion, I would start with voice. I would say that it is important for the poor to have voice and for that voice to be heard. And through that voice and through collectivization, what also happens is self-confidence. And for self-confidence to happen, you know, the very fact that you are at the bottom of the table, as it were, of the power table, you need support. You need hand-holding. And the poor functioning as the peers hand-holding each other is extremely important. For the system, it is about the messaging as well. It is a messaging of hope. It is a messaging of aspiration. It is a messaging of entitlements that you want to reach out. Basically, it's also about targeting, right? We've had scheme after scheme in the area of poverty reduction, and almost invariably, they have been hit by poor targeting and by the fact that we have not been able to get to the right person in the right time. So it's also about that. And it's about contribution. Close to 50% of the population regarding itself as productive and contributing to the economy and the polity of the country. You know, that is a very big and important ask. And being able to give them that confidence of that is, I think, one of the reasons why we actually collectivize poor women. And we've done that. We've done that in NRLM. We've been doing it in projects, the World Bank projects of before. We've done it in Kerala independently of these projects as well, through the Kudumbashree model. And there, it's not been an easy road. It's difficult because when you are trying to empower the weak, you are then interfering with power structures, with systems, and it means that you are also creating, and you are also in danger of perhaps perpetrating the very thing that you want to avoid. So you find, and this is something that we have seen in Kerala as well, is that the women collective itself becomes an end in itself. It becomes prone to elite capture, that their vested interests develop within the system, and these vested interests could be internal, these vested interests could be external, and none of these are good for the collective. If we want to, you know, when I started working in government, my very romantic notions of how we improve society was like, you know, it's all about social development. And then he said that social development is not really getting you anywhere. It's economic. You've got to, you know, financial growth and development is the key. And then you realize that the, you know, financial growth for people who are disempowered, it does not happen. It cannot happen in a vacuum. You've got to take on power structures. You've got to negotiate systems. You've got to develop the capability of doing that. So it is political. There is absolutely no question about it, that the financial is political. So handling that, the politics of it, is something that we actually need to equip our organizations with. With NRLM is beginning to get there. Kudumbashree already has 25 years we celebrated last month. 25 years is a very long time for an organization to be in play. It also means that this organization can get into becoming redundant, complacent, and full of itself and routine. So routinization is something that we need to be in guard against. And of course, for an organization like Kudumbashree, and I'm talking about this, it's going to be a problem you'll face later on, is the fact that the organization itself ages, and its inclination to do things changes with its age profile. So then comes this question: how about the young, the the ones who are, the next generation, how do you bring them in? And when we are reimagining our collective, we need to think about how we bring in the new also into the system. So what are the needs that we have? Why do we want to change? Are we looking at doing more of the same but in perhaps better? Is that what we really want to do? We are aiming at transformation, but is the transformation that we are aiming at, is it incremental or is it something that's going to be quick and ready? Because the country today is in a hurry. So if the country is in a hurry, then we have to be in a hurry as well. So how do you make haste slowly, or do you find that brilliant thing that will enable us to transform very rapidly? And I would like to, and I find it happens to me all the time. I speak after Mr. Vijayanand does, and I find myself saying the things that he already has spoken about. Well, I mean, that's part of the price of having very similar trajectories and me having been his disciple for quite a long period of time. So this is what I had noted here, that perhaps it's been something that's been bothering me for a while, that we think of, when we went into direct targeting of poverty and income generation schemes through the IRDP, starting from there, maybe we made a mistake. And what I was going to say was that we should have perhaps focused on health, education, nutrition. Lo and behold, he says that in the morning. That yes, that collectives, maybe it's not the direct targeting and the direct intervention that's important, it is about the enabling. And so can we think in terms of enabling our collectives to be powerful? Which would mean that how do we invest in their education? How do we invest in their health? How do we empower them to take care of each of these? And do we have a roadmap to developing that? Another question which comes in is about gender equality and equity. How is it that you can, because one of the raison d'etre of the collective of this nature is about claiming equity, claiming equality, being able to, because you know that it is not going to be granted down to you on a silver plate. You have to claim it. So how do you get to claim it? And unless you claim it, you are not going to be productive. You are not going to be a full citizen. So it is about claiming full citizenship, ultimately. So can the collective be reimagined in such a way that these women are able to overcome all the negatives, all the power disparities which are keeping them down and help them blossom? This is the question, which would also mean the self-interest. The interest, what is the collective self-interest and how do you promote it? And when we do all of that, there is this question, because ultimately, NRLM, Kudumbashree, all of us are about empowering the poor, about making them relevant in the ecosystem of the productive ecosystem, giving them the skills, the capability, and to move out of poverty and to stay out of it. But that also means that we have to deal with the outsider, because time to go. Okay. So, and the outsider is, and this is an interesting problem that we are facing in Kerala as well, because you have migrants coming in, we call them guest workers, and their families coming in, and the system doesn't, the system of poverty management doesn't look at them. It's important to do so, because disregarding them is that you're doing the very same, committing the very same crime unto the migrant that was committed to the poor, whom we are now bringing out of poverty. So since I've been told to wrap up in 2 minutes, I will just quickly talk of the areas of engagement that I think would be very interesting for us to look at. You know, Kudumbashree has, in the area of production and enterprise, our experience is perhaps the longest and most durable in the country. But today we are looking at important new things. One is the scope of women collectives coming in as local aggregators. COVID taught us a lot of lessons. It gave us a lot of problems, but it also showed us that there were opportunities that we did not know, did not recognize that actually exist. So local aggregators, the digital spaces and the opportunity, that digital knowledge itself is power, and that could be something which could be leveraged well. Another thing that would be important is about green energy, climate resilience, the way of the future, the problems of the future. And by virtue of building capability to handle that, you would also be looking at new opportunities for growth and for development. Control over the resources. So one last example of an interesting way of collective, and I would like to tie it up with the session that we had before. We were talking about transitioning from the urban and the rural spaces and that continuum. I distinctly remember a conversation about waste management and about how the urban waste handled in the rural areas, and rural can become resource for the urban, but the very fact that the rural is urbanizing means that the problems of the urban are reaching the rural as well. And we have right now in Kerala created what is known as the Haritha Karma Sena. 33,000 women in all the local governments of the state, both rural and urban, are collecting waste on a daily basis. And this has been very difficult because there is a value connotation on waste collection, but at the same time there is money in it if you do it right. And by the right kind of hand-holding, we find women who are getting 30,000, 40,000 rupees a month, that they're out of this, and in rural areas too, mind you. So, and also, today morning I just had this beautiful little message which came because we had these Haritha Sabhas yesterday in which we honored the Haritha Karma Senas. And they were talking about how, the power of, because they have learned to go digital, because they, QR coded housing and collection is being done under this. So they've learned how to work the smartphones. They've learned to do this. They've become green technicians. They've become advisors. And the community of people has learned to respect them. And so the whole idea of waste and what it connotates, they have been able to transform. And I think that's where we need to go. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I think you brought the whole rights, equity, and the control perspective to the collectives. You mentioned about, the financial is political. Some people say personal is political. I think you mentioned so rightly that, the starting point for any collectives is, the voice and confidence. And when I go and interact with the self-help groups, it comes out so, vividly that when you talk to the SHG members, the first thing that they say, that they have got is the name, identity, and the confidence being part of these collectives and all. Now it's time to get back to the the panel. We have such a steamed panel. I don't think we can have we could have a better panel than this. What we have sitting on the dais. We have representations from academia, the practitioners, bankers, regulators, and also, we'll also get to hear from, John from the global perspective. We have around 60 minutes, 65 minutes. And I know that in this full house, there are also people who have been, sitting here who have a huge experience, knowledge, and resource in this space. So I would like to reserve the last 20 minutes at least. And some of those, people from the audience, I will also, request them to share their thoughts. So we'll reserve around 20 minutes for the audience. Out of that, 10 minutes to select people, and the rest 10 minutes for the open question answers and all. And I get the right to choose who would be those people and all. Let me, I will request my panel colleagues to, hopefully we'll get 2 rounds, but If not, be very brief. I think 3 to 4 minutes of your initial reflection would be really, really helpful. Let me start with, Rima Men. Rima Men, I think you don't need any introduction. And I think you represent SEWA, and SEWA also does not require any introduction. I think, your work is both known in India as well as globally. And your association has been with SEWA has been quite long, as well as SEWA associations with collectives has been, equally, quite, of a long duration. Two things, if you could just reflect on. One is, when it comes to the collectives, how do you bring the, the member centrality into the collectives, so that we don't lose sight on the member and not just focus on the collectives? That's the one point. And the second is, I think in the context, the whole ecosystem has changed quite a lot with the technological advancement, the outreach of both what we call it, the Bazaar and Sarkar to Samaj. I think that has also changed over a period of time. So in this changing ecosystem, how do you see the role of the collectives and the promoters changing and the SEWA experience around that? Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, and I think it was good you didn't give my introduction. That gives me real clear 4 minutes to say, to respond to what you said. And I think I speak here on behalf of our 2.5 million members, all poor women workers in the informal economy, and 2/3 of our membership is rural. And what I would like to say here, when we speak about member-centric, development, is we reimagine the development of rural India as the Gramin Azadi or the Tisri Azadi. We had the political freedom, and then we also heard about Amul and Kutum Shri and other areas which brought about economic freedom. But I still feel that the rural India doesn't, and especially women in the rural areas, don't experience that freedom, and therefore if we reimagine in the context of Gramin Azadi or Tisri Azadi, and that's the responsibility collectively of all of us as well. And I think also when I was working on the Global Commission on the Future of Work at the ILO, the most far-reaching takeaway for me was that why do we need to be member-centric is that future of work is both women and rural. It is going to be more and more work, real work, and will come from the rural areas. And from the rural areas, again, women will play a big role. And it will be done by women and for women. So I think that is also one of the reasons why we need to be more member-centric. And when we talk about collectives, which may be cooperatives, federations, SHGs, associations, I think we also need to be very mindful that, the rural women or the members of these associations still don't remain producers or suppliers, but they also eventually become the owners and managers of their own enterprises. It may be cooperatives, it may be associations, federations, for-profit, not-for-profit companies. And I think that is why to have member-centric approach or members as the core becomes very, very important. And it's not just that I'm saying it from the sake of saying it, but I can give you n number of examples. We have Kamla, our food centered chain, and we now have Kamla, it started with one Kamla, but we have now 15 Kamlas in the city of Ahmedabad alone. And that's how do you bring the rural produce, pulses, spices, fruits, so farmers, orchard owners, grain, everybody to the city. And I think therefore what we need to do is that how can we have Kamlas in every university in the country, and I have Professor Sriram here as well, and I have NABARD on my side, and you here, who control the purse. And I think therefore we do need to work on these kind of things, and that's how you bring the rural to the urban, and that's what reimagining India is, and not So the producers remain where they are, but you know, the market comes to them. And I think the message that I would really like to bring about is twofold. One is what our founder Elaben taught us is Anubandh, which is interconnectedness or correlation. Whatever we do, how does it impact, you know, the surrounding? How does it impact? And so I think that is one thing. And the second is the whole message is of building an economy of nurturance. So we cannot only focus on rural and women, but we must see that, you know, how does the agenda impact in totality? How is it affecting other national and global initiatives on rural food infrastructure, health, women's empowerment, and also how is it impacting the rural environment and the lives all around us on this planet? So that is co-create, co-impact, and co-benefits. And so reimagining rural development will co-create, build mutuality, and be locally led under women's leadership. And that's where, again, you know, women-centric collectivization plays a role. And building an economy of nurturance. So the purpose of rural management is not just management, but management for change. Management in change in rural poverty, change in rural vulnerability, and women have to take charge of it. And that is why you again need women-centric. So how do you, what is this economy of nurturance? That economy where women and workers collaborate. That economy where economic growth is not at the cost of the ecosystem. That economy where water harvesting is more profitable than water pumping. And where planting trees brings more profit than cutting trees. And I think that is where you need, I am trying to answer your question of, you know, Bazaar, Sarkar, and Samaj. Unless and until we work on building an economy which is a nurturing economy. And I think it is now time that we let women lead that process in the rural areas. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I mean, let the women lead the whole economy of nature and nurture. If I may, Mr. Saji Krishnan, if I ask you, I think the NABARD again, Mr. Krishnan is the chairperson NABARD, and NABARD, engagement in terms of promoting, building cooperatives, it can't be overemphasized. Yeah. You have been, involved in these collectives and cooperatives from day one, and not only providing the financial support, but also a lot of brain power that you have, brought to this space. You personally have been very passionately leading this, the work around modernization of the primary agriculture cooperative societies. So, your thoughts and reflections around, modernization of these packs, as well as, what has been the past experience and what are we learning from our past work, and, what we are doing differently currently. So I think if you throw some lights on that. And the second part, I would also, request you, because your engagement is both with the SAG's work as well as with the FPO's work. And some people in some conversations, I keep hearing that SAG is a collective of past, whereas the FPO is a collective of future. Any thoughts and reflections around both these ideas? Over to you.
Okay, thank you. So 3 parts of that: cooperatives, SHGs, and FPOs. I'll take the SHGs first, because to have an organic link, NABARD started this SHG program, SHG Bank Linkage program rather, and then as an action research it came, and then it was taken over, rather it was handed over to government. One thing which we should be keeping in mind is that the social mobilization which we need to do of the scale which India has to achieve, I think government has to be there. In any private, of course, in bits and pieces we can have the social mobilization. So understandably, government came into the right time and started this NRLM movement. And whatever Madam Sarada Muralidharan was telling about the successes in Kerala. Kerala, of course, is a different, is of a different social setting. So any of such movements will be lapped up in Kerala. And then we have to now see, SHG bank linkage program after 30 years, when NABARD reflects, still there is a credit concentration towards areas which have been socially developed. Like in South, if you see the credit to GDP ratio of an average of around 60, which India has, South is almost at around 85 or to 90, or even in some states it is more than 100 also. If you see the states like Tamil Nadu and Kerala, the credit to GDP ratio is upwards of 200. Had the social movement not been there also, credit would have been concentrated on these areas. But whereas the credit gap, if you see in central India or eastern India, is to the scale of 75%, even in NRLM. So there, what I see is that Orissa and Bihar may be an outlier because of local interventions or focused attention by the governments over there. So we wanted to replicate whatever has been done in Orissa or Bihar to other states as well, because we see that the CD ratio of central area and also maybe some parts of northern India is somewhat around 40%, whereas ideal should be 60. So credit is a primary mover of development. That is what NABARD also believe, development through credit. So on that context, when we thought about the next stage, of course, the farmer producer organizations came into being. In India, as we develop, so the international evidence is that once a country develops, there will be a lot of consolidations happening rather than fragmentation. But India's case is little different because of the population pressure which we have. So a lot of fragmentation happened as country develops. So collectivization again of the fragmented land holdings is what NABARD thought of. So we thought about an action research projects similar to what we did in 80s for SHG, and that way the farmer producer organizations came into being. Now, as we move ahead, and understandably, government also stepped in with the central sector scheme of around forming 10,000 more farmer producer organizations, and we are at midway of implementation of that central scheme. Then we realized that no, we don't have proper wherewithal at the grassroots level to manage these organizations, because farmer producer organizations were envisioned as companies where the Companies Act and then CEO need to be there, a lot of management bandwidth need to be there, which is unfortunately not there in many of the states. Here again, the South is leading now in terms of formation and also in terms of accessing credit. South is leading. So we want to concentrate more on other areas where, like in central and eastern, where we need to actually intervene for social mobilization as well as for ensuring that there is equity in development. See, India is developing fast, but one part is going at double digit, the other part is dragging at around 5 or less than 5. So that is not a situation which we need to be in. So in that count, FPOs now we need to reimagine FPOs. That is what the thought within NABARD also came, and Government of India also was having almost similar thought. And that count, you all know that new Department of Cooperation, though cooperation is a state subject, central government want to have some sort of standardization of cooperatives across the country. The word cooperation itself will come with a lot of politicization. We have a negative feeling about cooperatives. So NABARD being the supervisor of the cooperative banks, we initially started with digitizing the cooperative banks, which is, of course, they want to be on par with any other bank. But the grassroots level, the primary agriculture credit societies, so that they were all neglected and left to fend for themselves. So there, what we are now thinking is to kick C out of that PACS, that is Primary Agriculture Credit Society. That credit should not be the focus. The primary societies should become value chain players, so that the whatever welfare they create out of their activity should remain within their members. And for that, a lot of governance aspects need to be there. There are a lot of transparency need to be there, because these are all legacy institutions with a lot of balance sheet issues and such other things. We saw that when we computerized cooperative banks, a lot of imbalances and unrecognized incomes, rather the NPAs were there, which were all put under the carpet. So that should not again happen in the cooperative societies. So we thought of bringing in transparency with all the inconsistencies which they have now. We don't want to precipitate the issues at the first stage itself. So first what we are thinking of is to enable them technologically. For that, we are in the process of computerizing close to around 70,000 primary agriculture credit societies. With state government ownership also be there. So we hopefully will complete the whole of computerization project by January of this year, 2024. That is within the financial year itself. We hope to do that. Of the 1,000 of that packs will be computerized maybe by first week of July, and then we'll have a large project approach for computerizing another close to 70,000. With that, what we are simultaneously trying to do is that to improve the governance, and the same mistake which we faced in the FPOs should not repeat here. The governance and the management bandwidth need to be there. So we are actually now in the process of simultaneously handholding people and also bringing in more people with knowledge about cooperatives and certification in cooperatives. So that process is also on. You might have heard about putting up a cooperative university. So there also we are a part of that movement. So we are going to put up a central university by Department of Cooperation, and then we will have regional centers and then certifications for, because 70,000 packs plus another 2,000, 2 lakh packs, which is what we are envisioning. It is not packs, it is activity groups. So, so with that, roughly, if you calculate at the rate of 3 per packs, around 6 lakh manpower additionally is needed, apart from the 70,000 which we had. Roughly around 8 lakh to maybe 10 lakh new persons will be there, trained professionals need to be there. So we are working parallelly with that, and we have a training institute which is overseeing all these activities. So going forward, what we feel is that the FPO movement should be actually subsumed into the cooperative movement, because we are targeting the same set of people. In SHG, we were targeting women. Now we are targeting male members mostly, because land is owned by the male members of the family. So the male members need to be targeted, aggregated, and they should be active players in the value chain rather than being primary producer and then selling off their produce without any processing or anything like that. So these societies, the primary societies, the new 2 lakh which we told is not packs, it is the activity-based societies which will be coming in. So they will be the producers, and they will be accessing credit through either the cooperative network or with the banking network which we had. Right now, availability of credit is not the issue, but then to make that demand, the supply is there, but the demand need to be created. But then for that, the bankers should be convinced about the business proposition or the borrowers which they are confronting with. So we need to activate these packs. So technology is one part which we'll do. Then parallelly we'll have the HR to be taken care. But then we are mindful that these are all highly politicized things. So we, in a democracy, we have to live with politics. But then we will try to minimize the political control over that. But then the corporate or cooperative governance is what we are looking at. The governance improvement in cooperatives side by side. And we hope that with these collectives coming in, the welfare in the rural areas will be improving, and the development aspect also will be taken care, the equity in development. That is what we are aiming at. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think, you started with development through credit, and then, we heard that, how you are trying to also get credit plus approach into the whole modernization of the cooperatives. Now I'll move to CS. CS, you heard, Mr. Saji Krishnan talking about, that they are targeting male members as part of the FPO. And I know that you have been the leading voice in suggesting that, the FPO should be promoted out of the SHG ecosystems. And I know you have been working, quite a lot, you and your organization have been working in terms of, already you have started a process of reimagining all these women collectives and all, and the several work, that you have done. I would request two things, if you could focus on. One is this whole, the pathway of building FPO ecosystems out of the SHG ecosystems, and especially if there are any design level modeling, changes which requires to be done when we promote women-led FPOs and all. And also in terms of the whole formalization and registration, what is that requires to be done at the ecosystem level and the regulatory level. So over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Anjani. I think, this is a very, what should I say, exciting times in India, post-COVID. So we seem to have these gatherings. And I think the whole context of reimagining the design of collectives is a very important one after the 30 years of the SHG movement in India. I thought Dr. Vijayanand in the morning was provocative and said, before we celebrate, we should reflect. So I thought maybe I'll just mention a couple of points in the form of reflection. One reflection which I want to mention, I'm sure some in the audience may not find it too palatable, but traveling across India, I get a sense that the SHG movement, the foundation is weakening a bit at the ground level. While we are looking at the village organizations, cluster level federations, the SHGs themselves, maybe there is monotony, there is boredom, but so how do we, look at strengthening the foundation, I think is something when we talk about institutional design. The second, which is an important one, is, what is the kind of whole autonomy and independence of these collectives, whether they are the self-help groups, their federations, even the farmer producer organizations. How do we make sure that they are business organizations, they are, membership-based organizations? Rima talked about the member centrality. So somehow one gets the feeling that they are increasingly becoming top-down organizations instead of being bottom-up, and the needs and aspirations of the members being the critical piece. So that's the second thought I have. The third is, when we have all the state rural livelihood missions, the whole idea of a sensitive support system is that kind of on the wane. I think we need to really look at how do they rediscover themselves, they reinvent themselves as truly, organizations that create an enabling and empowering institutions. So that's, I think, those are the three reflections that I have. In fact, when we were discussing in the preparation, when you talk about Germany or Netherlands or other countries, in those countries, the collectives thrive because the ecosystem is more enabling, more empowering, and the government is not the promoter. So I think that's something one needs to think about. So for the Rural Development Ministry or for all of us in this room to see how do we really create that kind of an enabling ecosystem in the country. Just in terms of the two questions that Anjani asked, how do we go forward from where we are? Both in terms of SHGs and federations and the farmers' collectives. I think building institutions is time consuming. I think we need to understand whether it is a cluster level federation or a farmer producer organization or even a federation of farmer producer organization. And so it doesn't happen just because you have a central sector scheme, or it doesn't happen simply because you thought about it. So the few ideas that I have in terms of the reimagining or the vision for the future, and by the way, APMAS organized over the past 2 years with the support of NABARD, 2 national conferences of the representatives of SHG federations, and we had 20 states participate. And they came up with a vision for the 2030 for the SHG federations. And one of the things all women demanded, and I want to put before you, is that we want autonomy and independence. We don't want to be controlled by the staff. We don't want to be controlled by the government. We don't want to be going to the political meetings. So that's the kind of request that they have, and they want to evolve in the way it is most appropriate in their context. So I think number one suggestion that I have is, how do we look at these collectives as business entities of the members being owners, managers, users, and controllers of their organizations. Of course, they'll have a professional support. So that's, I think, is the first and most important. And they cannot be business organizations if they are perpetually dependent on state support, whether it is in the form of revolving fund or community investment fund, or the so-called equity grant that is available. So I think in the reimagining, looking at them as business organizations is one important aspect. The second, in terms of the ecosystem development, is how do we make sure that our regulations, our laws are enabling for them to be autonomous and independent. And I think in 2020, we had the Supreme Court judgment which said right to form cooperatives is ensured under 19(1)(c). So I think we seem to be all the time violating that. In fact, even if we have to do one thing, all state laws and even the central laws of cooperation have to be amended if they have to be in compliance with 19(1)(c). So most states and central government do control collectives. So how do we kind of get out of that situation? The third suggestion that I have is, if you want to build capacity, if you want to build capability, if you want them to be autonomous and independent, there needs to be a sensitive support system, not of the government alone, but maybe of NGOs, maybe of private sector, maybe of organizations and institutions that are capable of doing that. So I think we need to broad base this incubation, mentoring, and support to these kind of collective enterprises that I want to mention. And I think, I have a problem with saying that, farmers is about men, but I think 70% or over 70% of agriculture is done by women. So I think building on this 30 years of SHG system, the social capital we have built, the kind of financial capital we have built, I think having all women FPOs or majority of women led FPOs, both in the shareholding as well as in the leadership, I think is, in my opinion, capitalizing on the wonderful work that has been done by many of us in this room. So, I am a votary for all women FPOs or women-led FPOs. Or even I want to go one step further and be provocative and say, maybe we don't have to promote so many FPOs, but look at the cluster level federations as organizations that engage in agriculture value chain development. Because building maybe 100,000 FPOs costs a lot of money and takes a lot of effort. I think a lot of organizations involved in FPO promotion are simply spending their time just mobilizing share capital. So if we really want to reimagine, how do we build on the huge institutions that we have? 500,000 SHG federations in the country. And of that, at least 50,000 are the cluster level federations are of a higher order. So why do we need to reinvent the wheel? Why do we need to do it simply because it's a government scheme or a government program? And that's kind of, in my opinion, waste of time. And also, I think for these community-based organizations, as business enterprises, collective enterprises, they need to have a role of self-regulation, self-supervision, self-control. And I think the federations, I think, Sriram, we were debating about SHG bank linkage is working wonderfully well. They today manage around 3 lakh crores, their own money and bank money. So maybe the federations can perform the role of rating, maybe the role of auditing, maybe the role of, again, looking at the European model. Can there be a self-regulatory system? Even in Kudumbashree, we have the Kudumbashree Audit and Account Services. So can we have that kind of a system so that it's not perpetually dependent on the staff of the SRLMs or the state government, because the degeneration will happen. And finally, I want to mention that for these institutions to be autonomous and independent business organizations led by the women, I want to mention that the legal form is very important. I'm not a votary for a SHG federation law, because again, that's very limiting. But we need a law in the context of the Supreme Court judgment, in the context of the 97th constitutional amendment, that truly promotes enterprises of the members, both women and men. In fact, I think we should really maybe move forward. Like in the morning, there was a discussion about this division or the binary nature of rural and urban may not be the most appropriate. So this division of men and women. So look at family as a unit and look at a legal and regulatory system that truly allows members to come forward. Any public good in terms of capacity building, ecosystem development, infrastructure development for food processing and other value addition can be done by government. But maybe we should stop giving equity grant, stop giving community investment fund, because the members lose ownership. I think, we cannot have community-based organizations perpetually dependent on the doles, whether they come from the World Bank or whether they come from wherever they come. They must be driven by their capital, whether it is savings, whether it is equity, whether it is deposits. Then only the ownership is strong, the responsibility is strong, the entire cooperative values and principles will be practiced by the members. Otherwise, we'll have a debris of organizations that may not survive in the long run. Thank you very much.
Thank you, CS. I think that's the best part of you being a panel member, that you don't, mind even bringing, I don't know whether that's a bitter truth or bitter facts but, telling, what you feel about certain things and all. So thank you for, raising some of those important elements, which is a very critical, part of the reimaginations of the collective. So, thank you for bringing those issues and all. Let me now go to one person which adds a very unique, brings a very unique, skill sets. And Professor Sriram, you are the one person who have written most in this space, have been researching on this space. So if I request you to share, and I know you'll have so many things to talk about it, but if you share two thoughts. One is, which CS also raised that in India still largely the whole, the interface between collectives and, with the mainstream financial institution has been at the primary level. For example, the SHG gets linked with the, the commercial bank and public sector and private sector banks and all, are not the federation. So do you see, as part of the reimagination, one should look at the possibilities and whether that there is a need for, looking at that element that the federation gets, connected with the large scale, the financial institutions. And the second, as you heard from CS also, that as of now, in terms of the building collectives, largely there has been a public sector investments. What is the role that we see the private sector in terms of building these collectives and also, doing business with them? So, if you could share your thoughts and insights around that, I think that will be super helpful. Over to you.
Since I'm next to the podium, I'll take the advantage of standing. As a prof, it's easier for me to stand and speak. Well, I'll make a couple of points. The disadvantage of coming fourth is that several of the points I've already made. The disadvantage of having a prior discussion is some of the points are stolen by CS. But that's okay. Doesn't matter. Nevertheless, I'll start by asking this provocative question: why do we need collectives at all? We don't need collectives. Then let's try and justify why do we need collectives. The only reason why we need collectives is the contractual relationship between the provider of services and the user of services is always disproportionate. There's a power imbalance. And in order to negotiate that power imbalance, you need a collective voice. And that's the only reason why we need collectives, nothing more. Now, therefore, going beyond, if the self-help groups have been able to negotiate with the banks, with the help of external support of civil society organizations, government, NRLM, NGOs, and so on. If they're able to negotiate with the bank for financial services that this is the terms of engagement, then why do we need a federation, right? So that is the question that we need to ask. We somehow end up creating these organizations, and then the organizations exist because they want to exist, rather than there is a purpose for that. So when we are talking of federations, is there a need for a federation? With the collective architecture, there might be need for federations for articulating some collective concerns, not for financial intermediation. If the private sector is, or the public sector banks are already providing financial intermediation and you're able to negotiate with the bank, you don't need a federation to come in between the SHG and the bank in order to do the intermediation. So there are other forms of things. So in one sense, what we possibly need is very strong collectives at the base level, which can negotiate a whole lot of things. Weak federations. Weak federations, when I say, I'm not saying morally weak federations, but financially, it should not. The problem with very financially, federations with financial concentration is that then they start dictating the terms for the primaries. They become more powerful than the primaries and attract all sorts of interests. That's one question that I'd like to leave you with. Second is that sometimes we do need large organizations because there are some activities which cannot happen without scale. Let's take banking, for instance. Your usual savings and credit can happen at the credit union level, but if you are looking at something like an insurance product or a mutual fund or access to a credit card or a modern this thing which is interconnected, you certainly need a strong upper tier organization. The question is, should that upper tier organization be controlled and governed by the members of the primary? That's a question that we need to ask. Or should that be somewhat delinked, and if it's a marketplace, can we just negotiate membership in that organization rather than having governance and control? Because please remember, when we are looking at cooperatives, the structure of cooperatives, and that's why all this challenges of raising share capital and other things come. Because the relationship of the member with the cooperative is transactional. And then you're trying to have an emotional relationship and a financial relationship and other things. You're basically creating a collective in order to get a better deal for the transactions that they're having. And if you don't recognize this, then we will create a set of entities which have a Swayambhu purpose and which will forget about what their original purpose was. Just look at, I'm coming from coming from Karnataka with a big Amul Nandini controversy behind me. There's a lot of politics behind it, but leaving the politics aside, what is Amul doing with non-member milk collection in multiple states? If it's a member-based organization and it wants to get best value for its members, fair enough, go and sell wherever you want. Why are you collecting milk from UP if you're a Gujarat Milk Producers Cooperative Society? I mean, that's a question. So the problem is that is happening essentially because Amul has now become like any other multinational, market share, growth, and these are the targets. And somewhere down the line, the members have forgotten. Now, the last question is, where is the Kheda farmer in the superstructure of Amul? Does he or she have a say in how they're opening up cheese plants in Varanasi or milk production plants in Bulandshahr or wherever it is, right? That then becomes a technocratic capture. So therefore, long answer to a short question, Anjani, is that we need to understand what is the purpose of this collectivization and what is the purpose of what is the meaning of scale, and do we really need scale in all purposes? And scale is a beautiful thing. It is exhibitionism. I'm big is a big exhibitionism. But beyond that, what is the value that is adding back to the member? And of course, you can always say, if you're just negotiating, you might be getting 60 paise of the consumer rupee for the milk producer of Amul, if they have the control over the production link as well as the marketing link as well as the export link, etc., they will get 65 rupees. Is this incremental 5 rupees worth that effort and worth the amount of investments that you're doing in terms of maintaining this thing? And the problem with collectives is that they're very, very difficult to build and very easy to destroy. I'll stop here on this pessimistic note.
Thank you. Thank you. I think, scale is a beautiful thing to do, but at what cost? I think that's an important element that one should look at it as part of the reimaginations of the collectives and all. Mr. John, if I come to you now, and you have been the part of the, one of the largest cooperative financial institutions, Rabobank, and you have worked both India and globally. So when India is going in this so-called Amrit Kal, India is going through this whole reimaginations of collective. What do you think that India can learn from the global experiences, and what is the global experience has to offer to India? If you could share your thoughts and some of those best practices, which has worked in other contexts of the world, I think that will be great.
Yeah, thank you so much, and it's really a pleasure being and an honor being on this panel. So thanks for having me. It's also a bit confusing sometimes because there's a lot of things, of course, like CS brought in a couple of very good points also on the basic principles that we need to cater to. I'm coming from a world where cooperatives are private sector, and that means that discussions that we're having here on how do we promote them, should we set it up, etc., they don't exist. It's basically members coming together because there is a market failure and they cannot access some of the products that they need, whether it's access to finance, whether it's access to insurance, whether it's access to adequate agricultural inputs, or whether it's access to markets. And so if it's not there, then people come together to organize it and create economies of scale. And economies of scale are not static. I can understand the whole situation that we want to have strong, local-rooted cooperatives, but at some point the locality is no longer the market, you have to scale up. Because the members come together to create value with each other. So it's an economic entity. And yes, there is empowerment in that. And yes, it's their company or their entity, so they are involved in managing that, and they need to be in the corporate governance. But the management can actually be professional, or should actually be professional, right? And we're talking sometimes in markets like India a lot on poverty elevation. And cooperatives are an excellent way of contributing to that. At the same time, it's not a poor man's or poor women's institution alone. We also need the more successful people in the rural environment or in the urban environment, if it's an urban cooperative, to join these cooperatives and actually help managing and getting direction. And I think these notions are very important for taking also these discussions forward. Because in India, I think there's been a bit too much nurturing from time to time of cooperatives, and as a result of too much nurturing, both by the government or by donor agencies, etc., cooperatives tend to sometimes look more towards the government or towards the donors than towards their membership involvement. But the same thing is that members sometimes look more on the immediate benefits that they get from the cooperative than that they see it as an extension of their own business, whether it's farming or any other business. It's an extension of their activity, and you scale it up. Just the other day, I was talking, because I want to come back a little bit also on where should we then focus on, and what do I see that is different? Well, one thing is private sector, economics as the basis of trying to enable cooperatives, but also really trying to get the economies of scale in. Only when we get economies of scale, we can elevate our members into a better position of the value chain. It's not a transactional organization. You own it. It's yours. It promotes your business. It's a relationship. It's a marriage, I would almost say. And so we have to make sure that that is captured in quite well. Yesterday I was speaking to a friend of mine, and I remembered a visit that I did to the largest Dutch dairy cooperative, together with a banker friend of mine. And he looked into the dairy cooperative and he said, I don't understand this company. They basically procure their milk from their members above the market price. Why? It doesn't make sense. And so I explained to him that actually this is of course the nature of the cooperative. They are margin organizers on behalf of their members. And because they have scaled up and vertically integrated, so really have specialized in dairy, the cooperative itself is now specialized in adding value, producing cheese, yogurts, all those kinds of things. And the margin that they make on it sustains for the cost of the cooperative itself. They can actually pay more for the milk from their producer members and create a dividend afterwards. And that is what cooperatives need to do. As a result, the value chain in dairy is very tight. And farmers have a very strong position in that value chain. And that is what we want to achieve with cooperatives. And that is what I think we also need to try to see how we can filter that concept into India more. Because I think India has a lot of cooperatives, be it PACs, FPOs, SAGs, in many shapes or forms, and many more to come. So let's enable them, give flexibility to people to form the cooperative in a way that they want, but have supervision that is managed properly, internally and externally, and make sure that we promote vertical integration, because currently we are focused on distribution. So we have LAC-PACs, we have FPOs, we have SAGs. It's all about getting to the grassroots of the economy and to the rural population or urban population. And that's a good thing, we need that. I can even imagine that the whole multi-purpose PACs initiative from NABARD really enables that you have a sort of a one-stop shop for farmers or the rural community that is very attractive and appealing. But beyond that, we need to make sure that we have specialized apex institutions that deliver the services to these outlets. And make sure that in our corporate governance, you can have a tiered system where farmers or any other group, women, urban workers, can be reflected in the governance. And then you can manage your organization almost in one tier, but still have a multi-tier corporate governance in place in order to make sure that there's membership, feeling of ownership, but also involvement in making sure that the organization is governed well.
Thank you, John. I think, and that's a conversation that we need to continue to have in terms of how, in the India can continue to learn from the global experiences around, building collectives and all. Now we have hardly left with around 15 minutes, and as I mentioned in the beginning, instead of going to the second round to the panel, there are a large number of experts sitting in the audience as well. So if I request some of the members to also share their thoughts, and to start with, Parmesh, if I may, put you on a spot and request you to talk about, what you think as part of this whole reimagination of collectives, the few things that we should be taking into consideration, especially because, you have been leading this work from the bank side and played a very significant role, especially in the scaling of the whole SAG work from south to north and everywhere else. And not only SAG, but in other collectives as well. So if you could share very briefly, some of those high thoughts coming to your mind as part of the reimagination.
Thanks. So difficult to add again to a lot of good points which I already brought in, and I agree with some of them. In a large country like India, to imagine that there will be one single way of doing things is very utopian and should not be attempted at all. I think we have very good diversity of approaches here, which we need to build on, number one. Second is, when we, if you read the project appraisal document of NRLM, we envisage that 20% of this program will be farmer producer organizations and collectives of women of a higher order. But unfortunately, that part did not go at the same pace as the other part, and we could have by that time done more proof of concept and experimentation on that. Having said that, if you look at what's happened in Bihar, because as was being told about the southern India part of it, you have to learn little more from what's happening in Jharkhand and Bihar, basically, and see what has happened there. So you see a maize producer company in Khagaria and Purnia. You see Kaushiki as a dairy producer company of 174 crores with 40,000 members, facilitated by NDDB Dairy Services, who were leading in the FPO formation when Amul got started. So we thought that a lot of work done on dairy cooperatives and other by NDDB and Amul at the earlier stages was more relevant for Bihar now, rather than looking at what Amul was doing right now. So what has not happened adequately is the kind of institution building you require to form FPOs. We declared 10,000 FPOs without doing the proof of concept at all, basically. So I think that has been, and I think we might commit the same mistake by going for cooperatives again at a large scale and think that by doing, just announcing a program doesn't mean that the program would automatically happen. So I think we require a very significant institution development effort of various kinds of models, and including what Rana was talking about, the women-owned FPOs. In fact, all the FPOs in Bihar and Jharkhand are women-owned. And I go with CS completely on that we will miss a very big opportunity of not transforming the SHG movement to become the basis for a next generation of FPOs, which will be very different. And we will first time bring gender into the cooperative movement in such a big way that it has not been attempted before. So I would still say that if we have to work on anything, which we have to work on is a proof of concept on a very large scale of women-owned organizations. And I think that's something we have to learn from what's happening globally. What you have to learn that in US, a lot of mutualistic organizations got converted into large agribusinesses. So, Sriram, I'm not, if Amul is going there, that's how what the whole world agribusiness has come through. It has started from cooperatives and it became agribusiness later on. And Rabo's experience and all shows Dutch organizations, German organizations are all like that. It's a natural corollary that the organizations which start from being mutualistic organizations become large agribusinesses. And we should not grudge that. India needs at least 1,000 such organizations like Amul in order to really transform the landscape of what we want to do. So we should really help that part to grow. But a lot of FPOs which are being formed are just being formed for providing inputs to members. And that's not viable. You cannot make money out of just making inputs. And I've been following what CS is doing with tomatoes and all in that, and that's where you have to go. Agro-processing, we still 9% is being processed at the local level. Energy is not being used. So a lot of work on processing and retail and logistics is required, which will generate next round of economic activity beyond just provision of inputs. So I think not only should we look at the numbers, we should look at the composition. In my mind, we should have less number with good proof of concept, institution building, and scale up those ones to become large ones, rather than have hundreds and thousands of initiatives there. And I think that's why we see now out of NRLM fold, only 195 women-led FPOs being formed till now. So if you consider the cluster federation number and you look at the FPOs, it is small and it will remain small, and I have no problem with that because this is not the same business which will go on scale like that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Parmesh, for sharing your thoughts. And it's certainly an opportunity for feminization of cooperatives first time that in India. And we should certainly look into that. Also the point that you said that no single approach would work in India. I think in the country like, as big as India, we do need a diversified approach, a diverse approach. Ashish says, I know you have raised, but let me, before I come to you, Naren, I think, again, I know that you have lived all your life, working with these collectives and all. So can I just briefly, in a minute and a half, if you could share your thoughts before I open it up, for the larger audience.
Thank you, Anjani. In fact, I had the opportunity not only promoting these institutions, but also I think working last 10, 15 years working with World Bank and the mission, I have also got some insights. So some of it, in fact, I agree, many of the panelists have raised some interesting things. I don't want to go into that. But I just feel I just want to give a few kind of reflections or observations for way forward that might be useful. The first thing I feel is that to make these, a lot of discussion on ownership, autonomy, making them three things which are most critical, I feel, given the current context of, CLFs and FPOs being promoted. Definitely, I think in Indian context, we need promotion. We can't say that like, Europe or other places that, Swayambhu, it cannot happen because a lot of people have lot of vulnerabilities and lot of, challenges. Even morning Shantiji was also sharing. In that context, there is need for promotion. But at the same time, how do we graduate and sustain is also the question which we need to look at, for which we need, I think, the ownership of the community in terms of having their own staff and they have to pay for this staff. That's the first thing. Second thing, their own systems and norms. It's not really SRLM. Maybe initially they can give some guidelines, but the guidelines should not become the norms for running the business or sustaining the organizations. That's a challenge today we are facing. Third important thing is finance, because no institution, what kind of earnings they're having, their own contributions for meeting their own costs. I think that's something which again, initially fine, but over a period of time, what is the kind of direction after 5 years, 10 years? Do we really look at that as something which we need to think? And looking forward, I feel these CLFs, I think, is a beautiful space in terms of, whatever the investments we have made to sustain, I think CLFs can play a significant role. Because SHGs, VIVOs on their own, I don't think they will sustain. And there's a lot of evidence on the ground in terms of successful organizations. CLFs do need investments. And these CLFs, each of them should become like at least a financial community microfinance institutions with a social development agenda. That's how I kind of see way forward. And for which I feel 2-3 core areas they need to invest. One is the microfinance operations, because there's a lot of opportunity if you look at. And currently, I think some of these existing basic practices we need to revisit, because 10 years back what we started, whether are they relevant, whether it is weekly meeting, whether it is same savings, or whether it is many other things, I just don't want to go in. So some of these things I think we should look at. And finally, CLF should emerge as platforms to enable other collectives. I think that's where they can play a very significant role, because most of this nurturing role can be played by the CLFs, for which CLFs have to be financially sustainable and independent. I'll just stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now I'll open it up for the larger audience. Yes, I know Saurav has raised hand, but before Saurav you raised, Ashish has raised hand. So can Ashish can have mic, and so that he can ask his question, and then Saurav will come to you. Okay. So Ashish, can I hope you are asking question and not originate a comment.
Am I supposed to ask only question? Can I have share my
No, but
observation?
whatever. But I think as long as you are brief, I think that should be fine.
I thought of sharing the practical experience.
Sure. But please, if you could be brief, I think that will be helpful.
So without in fact, confronting any of the panelists, I thought just sharing few of the lessons that we have learned while dealing with these collectives. A is that every shareholders, every member that you meet, the first thing that they would ask you, whether the FPO or whatever the collectives can give them a better price and a fair deal. So I'm talking about the design principles. When you are designing collectives of farmers, I think these are some of the things that you confront on a daily basis: better price, fair deal, timely payment, blah, blah, blah. And then, as a designer, you are also constantly thinking that how do I bring the better part of the consumer's rupee to those farmers, right? If you have to answer these two things, then for a while, you probably have to set aside some of those things like, very romantic ideas. Every farmer is the governor, the members control, and all of this kind of stuff. You just have to be really, really practical. And that's why I think if Amol is today going ahead and procuring from the non-members just to create more wealth and getting back that wealth to the members, there is nothing wrong in it. I also think that, well, Mr. Alag and they were thinking about this, corporatizing the cooperatives. They did all these things right, but they did not think about that from where the capital will come to these poor farmers. What we are confronting in the FPO space is basically the capital. The other side is a huge capital, which you don't have. We must have a different type of model in terms of corporate governance, that who will have what share. Now, let me bring the last point, I'll stop here. If the capitalist has capital, or they have capital, lots of capital, the producers have the capacity and the ability to maneuvering the production system. Now, try to set this context in the global context of carbon neutrality, sustainable production system, regenerative agriculture. Now you will see what power these producers have. They can actually produce what the globe is looking for. And that's where I see the synergy between the capital and the producers. And we have to think of a design of producers' collectives in that context, where there's a hybrid model is probably the future onwards. That's what I think. Thank you.
So hybrid model is the solution.
Yeah, that's right.
Saurav, yes.
Yeah, two short questions. So if you look at the
specific panel or to open
so any of the panel members, I will not pinpoint any of the speakers, but the question is, if you see the current context, there are multiplicity of institutions, many a times with overlapping members. When we are reimagining the institutional framework or the framework of the collectives, how this should be or how it should look like in future, because at times it seems that it is increasing drudgery for members itself. So this is one. The second question, I think it has not been touched upon, but if we are imagining the collectives, I think leadership will play an important role. So what should be done on in encouraging the leadership for their future roles in the collectives which we are imagining?
So, CS, I mean, if you could take this question of multiplicity of membership as well as the whole issue of leadership and your experience, and then I would request you also if you could.
In terms of, I agree with what Saurav is saying. Not only multiplicity, also the time and effort required. And that's why I feel SHG federations, we have invested, I don't know, yesterday Parmesh mentioned $3 billion of money in this entire SHG system. So why do we need to again reinvent? So I think if the SHGs themselves can promote their own FPOs, the capital issue is also solved. Like in the state of Andhra Pradesh or Telangana, a self-help group can get 20 lakh rupees loan. An FPO cannot even get 5 lakh rupees loan, 10 lakh rupees. It will take 5 years, maybe 10 years for the FPO to get 1 crore or 5 crore or 10 crores of loan. So I think if there is an organic link between the SHGs and FPOs, I also agree with what Sriram said, that federations should not get into too much of financial intermediaries. So they can play more of a regulatory, self-regulatory organizations. But I think they can also be involved in promoting FPOs from those who are farmers who are members of self-help groups. The second point I want to mention as part of the reimagining, why not our SHG banks? I think, we somehow think that bank linkage, by the way, is still not perfect. Even today, we have huge issues. The cash credit limit is no place is effectively used. It's always seen as a term loan by self-help group. So though it is, at least banks treat them as a cash credit facility. So I think we should look at Srinidhi kind of institutions, maybe every state where the SHGs or their own federations can promote their own financial institutions, so that while you can leverage banks, but you also have enterprise finance by your own organizations. I think that could be something that we can look at. But we definitely, in the reimagining or the institutional architecture, need to, create this organic link between SHGs and FPOs. And just related to we did a study recently of the Jilla Samakyas, the district level federations of SHGs. And again, we are creating too many tiers. Maybe they're unnecessary. There is a bureaucratization and it becomes top down. So we need to really rethink about these so that there is no burden on the women with all these institutions. Thank you.
Now, one small thing, when we look back in the SHG bank linkage program, why it's scaled up so fast? It scaled up because of the government intervention and then the public sector banks. If you see that the credit which is provided to SHGs, 98% of the credit is coming from the private sector banks, and that too because of the push, because of the lead bank system which is coming. So essentially it is a government driven, but then with a social objective. Public sector banks. I'm telling you about the public sector bank. 98% is coming from the public sector banks. So because, it is not because they have a motive to help, but then there is a push from the government, and also RBI has facilitated that. So going by the learnings, in the FPO movement also, if you see, the credit, of course, we are providing a credit guarantee. We are aware that banks will not be coming forward to give credit to a newly set up entity. So some sort of a credit risk mitigation need to be there. That is why the credit risk guarantee is there. But then offtake is lesser. But if you see that the whole of 1,000 odd FPOs have been assisted so far, of which around 800 odd is assisted by NABARD subsidiary alone, and remaining by the public sector banks. So there again, it is the government intervention which has helped. So going forward, if at all we are to reimagine how we should go as a federated structure or whatever it is, the government support and from the public sector, something should be there. Then, of course, assisted by the whatever socially minded organizations we have.
So government support is critical. Yes. Can you just focus on the leadership question which Saurabh had raised?
Sure. And I think needless to say that whether it's an SHG cooperative or a federation or an association, I think they are all connected to each other like a banyan tree. So where one ends, the other starts. And therefore, I think what is really very important is investing in education. Members' education in all different institutions, whether it's a self-help group, cooperative, federation, collection, and also investing in building the leadership. And when I say it's not political leadership, but it's, leadership in managing. So I think there is a need to set up a whole grassroots managers school or the leadership. And finally, I think we also need to invest in values. I think we become so focused on either finance or on business. But I think one thing which is very, very important is that when we all need to remain united. Unless and until, we are all one, we are all united, we share this spirit of our unity, that we are all one, we will not be able to keep these federations or, cooperatives or anything vibrant and active. So I would really like to say that, can we all together say, Hum sab ek hai. I would urge that we all say, Hum sab ek hai. Hum sab. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's a good note to end. Sorry, Deepak, I know you had raised hand, but I'm getting a signal from the organizer saying that lunch is ready. So let's break for the lunch, and I think you can catch hold of the panel members and and ask whatever that you wanted to ask. Thank you. Thank you so much. I thoroughly enjoyed the whole conversation. I hope you also must have enjoyed it.
The panel raised a few pertinent questions, right from questioning whether the current way of setting up collectives are the way to go forward, to discussing how we can strengthen the current set of collectives to gain an international perspective on the topic. The panel provided quite a lot of insights. Thank you so much.